Reality television often sells itself as a stage for transformation, redemption, and the promise of a brand new beginning. When Breaking Amish first premiered, audiences were instantly drawn into the lives of young men and women daring to abandon centuries of tradition in pursuit of freedom. Among those faces was Sabrina Burkholder, whose openness and raw honesty struck viewers in a way that was unforgettable. She wasn't simply another cast member in a lineup of rebels. She became the emotional center of the story. Yet behind her quiet smile and those heartfelt confessions on screen, there was another narrative unfolding, one far darker than what TLC's cameras were able to capture. The tragic journey of Sabrina Burkholder from Breaking Amish is one that will leave even the hardest heart shaken with grief. Her story began with a face filled with youthful hope. In 2012, Sabrina, a young Mennonite woman, stepped into the bright and unforgiving world of reality television when she joined Breaking Amish. On the surface, she seemed like just another participant willing to shed the strict boundaries of her faith for a taste of modern life. But it quickly became clear she was more than that. Sabrina carried with her a fragility rarely seen on television, rawness that made every word sound unfiltered and every emotion hit with striking force. She spoke with a candor that unsettled some and deeply moved others. Unlike the reality stars who carefully performed for the cameras, Sabrina had no mask. Her vulnerability was startling and, for viewers, unforgettable. She stumbled through her journey with trembling honesty, not with scripted lines or polished composure. That honesty created a powerful connection with audiences, but it also left her exposed. Behind her hesitant laughter and timid smile was a storm that nearly cost her everything. The audience watched the edited drama of arguments, tears and reconciliations, but what they couldn't see were the scars she brought with her into the spotlight, the inner demons. Whispering just beyond the edges of every scene, Sabrina's story was never simply that of a reality TV figure. It was the tale of a woman caught between the suffocating expectations of her religious upbringing, the relentless pressure of sudden fame, and the private torment that haunted her long before she ever appeared on camera. To truly understand her is to see the fragile line between survival and collapse. And when her journey is told in full, it is almost impossible not to be moved to tears. Her roots traced back to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where sprawling fields stretch endlessly. Horse-drawn buggies still outnumber cars, and tradition is lived out with unwavering devotion. Lancaster is the heartland of Amish and Mennonite faiths, communities anchored in centuries-old ways of life. It was in this strict environment that Sabrina was raised. Though the Mennonite faith is considered less restrictive than the Amish, its expectations are still rigid and deeply binding. Humility was not optional, it was a command. Discipline and obedience were non-negotiable. While individuality was often treated as a threat to the order of the community, for a child searching for her own identity, such rules could feel like heavy chains. Sabrina grew up in a world where deviation drew sharp disapproval, where any attempt at self-expression clashed violently with entrenched codes of modesty and silence. So, when she joined Breaking Amish, she stepped into an alien world. She was not Amish herself, yet the show placed her among Amish castmates, making her the only Mennonite in the group. This difference isolated her but also gave her a distinct presence in the storyline. She lived as the outlier among outliers. Every tear she shed, every misstep she made, and every confession she gave was magnified by that role. For Sabrina, joining the show was far more than a career move. It was a leap into unknown territory, a chance to test life beyond Lancaster and beyond the rigid framework of her upbringing. Viewers found her story captivating not because it was smooth or glamorous, but because it was riddled with struggle. She wrestled openly with questions of faith, her identity, and the pull of her roots. She faltered, confessed weakness, and allowed cameras to capture her most vulnerable moments. That rare transparency made her one of the most memorable figures in the entire franchise. Yet the outside world was far harsher than she could have ever imagined. Reality television offered Sabrina exposure, but it did not protect her. Beneath her hesitant confidence was a young woman still unprepared for the relentless scrutiny that comes with fame. She carried with her unhealed wounds, silent scars, an unspoken trauma. And in front of millions, those wounds began to reopen, magnified by stage lights that were far brighter than she could bear. Reality TV, after all, is built on illusions. It promises liberation, but in truth, it rarely shows the whole picture. For Sabrina, the cameras only amplified her pain. Every doubt, every slip, every breakdown was packaged into episodes for entertainment. Producers controlled her storyline arguments, crises of faith, emotional collapses, transforming them into spectacles that entertained the masses but healed nothing. What viewers saw as dramatic television were in reality Sabrina's very real battles. Off camera, the pain was deeper than anyone realized. She lived with crushing loneliness, unresolved trauma, and the suffocating burden of being portrayed as fragile and broken. While the audience speculated and the network profited, Sabrina was left alone to pick up the pieces after the cameras stopped rolling. Instead of finding freedom, she was caught in a new kind of control. This time, it wasn't her religious community holding the reins, it was the entertainment industry. Fame did not free her. It shackled her, binding her to a narrative she had no power to change. Behind the bright lights, Sabrina's real struggles began to surface. She was not just a cast member. She was also a mother. And for a brief time, motherhood gave her a fragile anchor in her chaotic world. But the weight of responsibility collided brutally with her ongoing personal battles. In 2015, Sabrina lost custody of her daughter Oakley. That loss cut deeper than anything she had ever faced. For Sabrina, Oakley wasn't just her child, she was a chance at redemption, proof that she could build something steady and pure despite her past. Holding her daughter gave her reason to resist the temptations that haunted her. But addiction and instability intervened, and the state deemed her unfit. Overnight, her greatest source of hope was stripped away, leaving a void no fame or attention could ever fill. To fans, the custody battle became another plot line, another point of drama to gossip about online or to consume in headlines. But for Sabrina, it was no storyline. It was her life being torn apart piece by piece. Behind the scenes, grief consumed her. She mourned not just the loss of her daughter, but the stability and redemption she thought she had found. That wound would shape much of her downward spiral in the years to come. As the show went on, Sabrina's personal struggles became public property. Her troubles with the law turned from whispers to headlines. Arrests for possession, conspiracy charges, and parole violations marked her descent. Each humiliating moment was dissected not as the tragedy of a woman in pain, but as entertainment. At the heart of it all was heroin, a drug infamous for destroying families and erasing futures. For Sabrina, heroin was a merciless captor. It dulled her pain temporarily, but demanded her life in return. It wrecked her judgment, fractured her relationships, and left a trail of missed court dates, broken promises, and shattered trust. Her addiction wasn't simply a story of weakness. It was a cycle of brief recoveries followed by relapses, each one compounding her despair. Addiction was not the cause of her unraveling. It was the visible symptom of deeper wounds she had carried long before. For Sabrina, drugs weren't rebellion or recklessness. They were a desperate attempt to survive torment she had no other tools to face. From the outside, her life looked chaotic. But inside, every relapse was tied to a pain that refused to let her go. Addiction did not define hurt, revealed. It's just how profoundly unhealed she was. The trauma that fueled. Sabrina's spiral was not just a fleeting moment in time, it was a deep wound that defined her existence. Over the years, the true root of her suffering slowly came into focus, revealing a reality that shocked those who thought they knew her story. In time, Sabrina reportedly disclosed something she had kept hidden for years. As a child, she had been abused. These confessions were not easy to share. Trauma like hers rarely bursts into the open. It festers in silence, wrapping itself around a person's sense of identity, shaping decisions, and leaving scars invisible to outsiders, yet painfully real to the one who carries them. The abuse Sabrina endured was not a single memory she could bury in the past. Instead, it was an open wound that bled into every stage of her life. It stole her sense of safety before she even understood what safety was. It shattered her ability to trust others, corroded her self-worth, and left her constantly searching for relief from memories that screamed louder with each passing year. Drugs tragically became her way out. Heroin dulled the flashbacks. Pills softened the sharp edges of pain. Each high was not about chasing pleasure, but about shielding herself, if only for a moment, from the echoes of childhood horrors that followed her into adulthood. To outsiders, it looked like self-destruction. But to Sabrina, it was survival. Each relapse was not a pursuit of euphoria, but a desperate grasp for silence. Addiction is often described in simple terms: poor decisions, lack of discipline, moral weakness. But in Sabrina's case, the truth was far more complicated. Her tragic path did not come from rebellion or a reckless spirit. It came from untreated wounds, traumas buried so deeply that they shaped her long before she even had the chance to grow into herself. Her adulthood was a direct continuation of her broken childhood, one long war against unspoken pain. Every relapse, every misstep, was not simply a failure. It was an echo of abuse never confronted, a reminder that without healing and support, old wounds only grow deeper. Sabrina's story was never just about addiction or poor choices. It was about the devastating cost of silence, the cruelty of untreated trauma, and the collapse that becomes inevitable when the past is left unresolved. Even as her personal life spiraled, Sabrina remained bound to the world of reality television. TLC, the network that first introduced her to the public, refused to let her fade from view. Contracts tied her to producers, and at one point, she even signed legal releases that allowed not just the showrunners, but her parole officers to monitor her recovery. Every relapse, every stint in rehab, every setback wasn't just reported to the courts, it was captured on camera. On the surface, this looked like accountability. She was being held responsible, her actions scrutinized under the watchful eyes of both authority figures and an audience. But beneath the surface, it was exploitation. Her most painful struggles were turned into consumable storylines. Tearful confessions, court appearances, and relapses were edited into gripping television, packaged for viewers to debate online. For producers, Sabrina's pain made for raw and compelling content. For audiences, she became a tragic character, cautionary tale to discuss at a distance. But for Sabrina herself, each relapse was not an episode arc. It was a personal collapse filled with shame, fear, and the crushing realization that her demons still controlled her life. Having those private moments broadcast to millions meant she was never allowed the dignity of breaking down in silence. Even her failures became public property. Living in this dual reality, experiencing life, while also watching it dissected on television, only deepened her isolation. She wasn't just fighting for sobriety. She was battling an industry that profited from her pain. Fame, which once promised opportunity, became a trap. Every mistake was magnified, every relapse replayed, every weakness archived forever. Too many, she was no longer a woman in pain, but a spectacle. And for someone already carrying unbearable trauma, the intrusion of cameras and public judgment made her struggle nearly impossible to endure. The breaking point came in June 2018, just days before Sabrina's 32nd birthday. After nearly a year of fragile sobriety, everything unraveled in one night. She and her boyfriend, Jethro Nolt, visited a friend in York County, Pennsylvania. For Sabrina, who fought daily battles to stay sober, the gathering carried silent danger. At some point, her friend offered her heroin chillingly, framing it as a birthday gift. What happened next blurred into fragments. Sabrina recalled feeling something suddenly wrong, a disorienting wave she couldn't understand. Within minutes, her heart stopped. She was clinically dead. Panic filled the room. Jethro screamed for CPR, his voice breaking with desperation. Their friend pressed down on her chest with frantic determination, refusing to give up even as precious minutes passed. Narcan was administered once, then again. Against impossible odds, her pulse slowly returned. When her eyes finally opened, Sabrina carried with her visions no earthly explanation could dismiss. She spoke of seeing her grandmother and then her mother, who had died when Sabrina was only 6. These weren't dreams, she said. They were vivid encounters, like she had crossed into another realm. For a brief moment, she had stepped beyond life and been pulled back. This overdose was more than another relapse. It was a literal brush with death, a moment that shook her to the core. Sabrina had not simply survived, she had died and come back. The weight of that reality could not be ignored. The experience stripped away her last illusions, forcing her to confront how unrecognizable her life had become. With that clarity, she checked herself into rehab. This time it wasn't about appearances or satisfying contracts. It was about reclaiming her life away from cameras, away from public judgment. Choosing treatment was not weakness, but strength, an act of survival and defiance. Rehabilitation was not easy. For years, drugs had been her shield against unbearable memories. Now, she had to face those traumas head-on: the childhood abuse, the silence that had turned into dependence, the patterns that destroyed her. Later, she admitted publicly that her drug use was never about chasing pleasure. It was about numbing pain. With that admission, she reframed her narrative. Her life was not just about addiction, it was about survival in the face of wounds most people never see. Speaking her truth was not just a confession. It was an act of courage. Sabrina's recovery was far from neat. It wasn't a simple story of relapse, redemption, and closure. It was messy, ongoing, and full of setbacks. Yet, in the middle of it all, she began to reclaim her identity, not just as a reality star, but as a mother, a partner, and above all, a resilient woman. Her story remains unfinished. Every day, she continues her fight for sobriety. To repair what was broken and to speak for others, carrying invisible scars. But her life resists the polished fairy tale of happily ever after. Instead, it is raw, painful, and brutally honest. From her strict Mennonite roots to the fame of Breaking Amish, from motherhood to the spiral of addiction, from death's doorstep to survival, her life is a mosaic of contradictions. To the outside world, Sabrina was often just a reality TV figure whose lowest moments were broadcast as entertainment. But to those who look closer, her story reveals something much deeper, a testament to resilience in the face of unbearable trauma. Her pain became public property, yet she continues to stand. She remains not just a tragic figure, but a symbol of defiance. Sabrina's journey will leave you in tears, not simply because of its heartbreak, but because it reflects universal truths about trauma, survival, and the quiet battles so many fight behind closed doors. She is a woman marked by mistakes, grief, resilience, and second chances. And while her past is filled with shadows, her present is defined by the courage to keep going. This is not just the story of Sabrina Burkholder, it is the story of endurance itself. A life torn apart and stitched together again in imperfect threads. A human spirit refusing to surrender, even when crushed under the weight of history and pain. Her journey offers no perfect ending. Instead, it offers something more honest. The reality that survival is, in itself, a victory. And in that survival, Sabrina has created a story that resonates deeply, not as a spectacle, but as a raw and unflinching testament to what it means to keep living when everything tries to silence you. Sabrina Burkholder's journey, when looked at closely, is not just the tragedy of a reality television personality, it is also a mirror held up to society. Through her, we see how fame can so easily exploit the vulnerable, how trauma left untreated becomes a lifetime sentence, and how addiction is rarely about weakness, but about wounds that never healed. Her story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the systems that fail people like her: the justice system, the entertainment industry, and the very culture that consumes suffering as entertainment. What makes Sabrina's life resonate so deeply is that it refuses to be boxed into a single narrative. She's not just an addict, not just a mother, not just a reality star, not just a survivor of abuse. She is all of these things and more, a mosaic of contradictions that reveal the complexity of human existence. Her resilience does not erase her pain. Her strength does not undo her scars. Yet her very survival is proof of a defiance that cannot be manufactured or scripted. In many ways, Sabrina's fight is also the fight of countless others whose stories never make it to television. For every relapse she endured publicly, there are thousands of unseen battles happening in silence. For every harsh judgment she received from viewers, there are people in our own lives who carry the same invisible scars: family members, friends, neighbors quietly trying to endure what they cannot always explain. Sabrina's willingness to speak about her abuse and her addiction gave voice to these hidden struggles. Breaking the silence that so often keeps survivors trapped, her near-death experience in 2018 was a turning point. But it was not the end of her hardships. Recovery, as she has shown, is never straightforward. It is not about perfection, but persistence. Sabrina's strength lies not in being flawless, but in continuing despite the setbacks, despite the judgments, and despite the exploitation of her pain. She stands as a reminder that healing is not linear, and that survival, however messy, is still worth honoring. To watch Sabrina's story unfold is to be reminded of the fragility and resilience of the human spirit. Yes, her past is marked by trauma, exploitation, and collapse. But her present is defined by the courage to keep standing, to keep searching for peace, and to keep telling her truth. Her journey will leave you in tears, not because it is tragic alone, but because it reveals something profoundly human. It shows us that endurance itself is a form of victory, that even in the darkest circumstances, the will to keep living, to keep fighting, is itself an act of defiance against everything that seeks to destroy us. Sabrina Burkholder's story is not finished. Perhaps that is its greatest lesson. Life does not offer tidy resolutions. It offers ongoing battles, small victories, and the constant possibility of collapse and return. But within that ongoing fight lies a raw kind of beauty, the beauty of survival. And in telling her story, Sabrina has given us more than just a reality TV arc. She has offered us a glimpse of the unbreakable human spirit. Scarred but unyielding, fragile yet enduring, and always reaching for healing, no matter how heavy the past may be.